Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Now I know there was a bit of a hiatus for the past 2 weeks on True Crime Thursday, but we are back stronger than ever. Now for those who have just clicked on my channel for the first time, hello, join the club, I'm Ayman. Amongst many other things, I'm a huge true crime junkie, hence this ongoing series. Now today's case is probably a father's worst nightmare. Now imagine your wife and daughters go on holiday and leave their home for the first time and they never return. Just like that, you lose your entire family to an unspeakable tragedy. So, what happened to the Rogers girls when they went on holiday? This is the holiday from hell. The victims. There are 3 victims in this case who are as follows: 36-year-old mum Joan Rogers and her 2 children, 17-year-old Michelle and 14-year-old Christy. Now the family owned a dairy farm in Wilshire, Ohio, and the couple had been high school sweethearts who got married right after graduating in 1971. Michelle was born a year later in February of 1972 and Christy 2 years later in October of 1974. Now, neither parent came from money, so both were extremely hard-working. Jo worked on the farm, she had her own night job, and she obviously took care of the children. Personality-wise, she was very outgoing, very fun, and just boisterous, whereas her husband Hal was the more mellow one. You know how they say, opposites attract. Now, their daughters also loved animals since they grew up on a farm. Michelle, the older one, went more on Hal and was slightly more reserved than Christy. Michelle was a tomboy and liked, going to parties with her close friends and chilling, smoking, drinking, hanging out with her boyfriend Jeff, just teenage things. Christy, on the other hand, went straight on her mum, always talking and bubbly and cheerful. She was a cheerleader at high school, she had a ton of friends, and for what it was worth, she was low-key Hal's favorite. The tragedy struck the family before the murders even took place. Hal's brother John was also living on the farm along with the family, and he was eventually arrested for attacking his ex-girlfriend who was living in the trailer with him. It was also revealed through audio tapes and videos that John was sexually abusing Michelle since she was 14 years old. On to the case. On the 26th of May 1989, the girls left their farm in Ohio and were hella excited for their first ever vacation. Location, Florida. That rhymed, I didn't even mean it to. And from all the stories these days, we already know that Florida is just batshit crazy anyway, but they've been working hard, so honestly they deserved a break. Now the girls drove to Florida around noon, and 8 hours and 500 miles later they had reached Georgia, where they slept at a random motel and continued the journey the next day. When they got to Orlando, the first stop for them was obviously the Jacksonville Zoo. Have fun, I honestly love zoos. I went to Toronto Zoo last year with Julian, and because it was COVID, it was a drive-through zoo, and it was so bloody hot that day, but it was so much fun. I loved it. I love zoos, honestly. Animals, my thing. Anywho, back to the case. Now the next 4 days were filled with sightseeing and touristy activities, and then they headed for Tampa. The girls stayed at the Days Inn, and they were looking for some things to do at Clearwater Beach. While they were looking at a brochure outside, a man approached Joe saying he was also from Ohio, and that there was a boat launch happening that evening, and whether they wanted to come on his boat with him and watch the sunset. He wrote down the instructions and directions for them, and that was that. The afternoon came and went, and at around 7:30 p.m. the girls left the boat launch and boarded the vessel sometime between 8:30 and 9. And that was the last time anyone would have heard from the girls. It was the 4th of June before anyone had any idea that something horrific had happened to them. A sailboat was gliding through the water when the people aboard it noticed something bobbing around in the water. As they got closer, they realized to their horror that it wasn't a huge piece of plastic waste. That would have been the best case scenario. It was a human body. The Coast Guard found it really difficult to get the body out of the water, and when they finally did, they realized why. Tied to the neck of this body was a rope with a 30-pound concrete block at the end of it. Now, as they were sailing back to shore with the unidentified body, they got a call about a second body that had been found 2 miles north of the first one. Now, on their way to the second body, they got the heartbreaking call that a third body had been found floating in the water as well. Now, the other 2 bodies were also tied to concrete blocks. All 3 had had their hands and feet bound, their mouths had been duct taped over, and they were nude from the waist down. But authorities failed to identify whose bodies they'd found, and I don't blame them. So many tourists flooded into Florida at that time of the year, so it's so hard to pinpoint who they could have been. Onto the investigation. On the 8th of June, approximately 4 days after the discovery of the bodies, there was about to be a break in the case. A maid working at the Days Inn motel realized that room 251 had not been touched for days. The guests had left all their belongings there, but had not slept in their beds or used any of the towels. The manager of the hotel also started putting the puzzle pieces together and realized he also hadn't seen the girls since they checked in on the 1st. So, to figure out if he was right, detectives contacted Hal for his family's dental records, and all 3 were a match. His entire family had been brutally murdered while on holiday, and the culprit was still out there somewhere at large. Now, autopsy results show that the girls were still alive when they were thrown into the water because water was found inside their lungs. And since they'd been in the water for a few days, there were no clues whatsoever on their bodies, no fingerprints or DNA, nothing to point them closer to an assailant. Weirdly enough, Hal was actually the first suspect the police had in mind, but he'd literally been in Ohio at the time of the murders, so it couldn't possibly have been him. Next, they tried to locate the girls' car, which they found at the public boat launch, but it was clear it hadn't been driven since the 1st. What led them to finding the assailant were the sets of instructions and directions written and left in the car. One was clearly written by Joan, however the other one was written in handwriting that was unrecognizable, meaning it was most likely the assailant's handwriting. And I feel like the police handled this note really well. They actually put this note on a huge billboard asking if anyone recognized the handwriting, and to their surprise, they actually got a call from a woman named Joanne Steffi. Jo claimed the handwriting matched that of a man who had been her contractor once upon a time. His name was Oba Chandler. And when receipts from his work and the note were compared, it was a match. Finally, they had their suspect, and turns out Chandler lived not even a mile away from the boat launch, and upon interrogation, he denied ever meeting the girls. I mean, obviously as a suspect, you're gonna deny everything the police throw at you. Now, his phone records show that the day he killed the Rogers, he called his wife saying he was gonna come home late due to engine problems, and he did that another time as well after raping a Canadian tourist called Judy Blair. In a lineup done later, Judy identified him as her abuser. Authorities also tested the notes for any fingerprints, and a super defined palm print was tested against Chandler's, and it was a match. He was arrested in September of 1992 for the murders, and his trial obviously did not go in his favor at all. He was spewing lie after lie, claiming he was on his boat alone during both times of the crimes. The cherry on top was that Chandler's own daughter testified against him, saying after he had committed the crimes, he visited her and her husband and told them what he had done. And it was pretty much case closed after that. He was sentenced to the death penalty and eventually executed via lethal injection after spending 17 years on death row. He died in November of 2011 at the age of 65. And that is it for today's case, you guys. Weirdly enough, while I was looking for a case to do for this week's True Crime Thursday, I read about this case on Reddit and I was like, why does this case sound so familiar? And then I realized when Forensic Files was still on Netflix, I had already seen an episode of this case and I was like, I remember that case, it was brutal as hell, so I was like, I absolutely have to cover it. Like, it's such an interesting case. And like the amount of detail and work that went into recognizing whose handwriting was whose was impeccable. And the fact that they were like analyzing, how he wrote his T's, the fact he would capitalize his T's even if the T was in the middle of the word, which just isn't natural. So these little tiny clues just end up making sense and leading you to the murderer. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Also, can we laugh at the fact that the police thought it was Hal at the beginning? Like, Hal's in Ohio, mate. He's not murdering his own family. Anyway, you guys, let me know what you thought in the comments below. I will see you in the next one. Bye!